and welcome to Sophie & Co. I'm Sophie Shevardnadze. Lebanon has accepted hundreds of thousands of refugees from war-torn Syria. They come in addition to the already great number of refugees from Palestine, whose well-being remains out of sight after decades in exile. Are the newcomers there for the long term, and will they cause the Lebanese economy to crumble? Will Lebanon be dragged deeper into its neighbors' conflict? Well, we went to Beirut to talk to one of the country's most influential politicians, former Prime Minister Fouad Siniora.
They cross the border every day, the Syrian refugees, escaping the chaos of war in their land, filling up homes and tent camps, stranded and separated from their families. Lebanon promised to keep the border open for whoever runs from the war, but struggles to feed and keep warm all the needy, while lacking a plan for their future. How strong is Lebanon's helping hand? How far will it reach? How committed is Beirut to its neighbor?
Fouad Siniora, thank you very much for being with RT today.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
All right, so we're actually witnessing a resurgence of sectarian violence here in Beirut. Do you think that Lebanon, is there a chance that Lebanon can remain neutral in its position towards the Syrian civil war?
I really count a great deal on the, let's say, the resistance of the Lebanese, their resistance of not accepting that their country will be dragged into any type of confrontation among the various components. To the contrary, I think there is a great deal of, let's say, firm positions among the Lebanese that they want to live together. They want to really carry on the dialogue together. There are lots of issues that need to be sorted out, but this does not mean that they will resort to violence in trying to deal with this matter. On the other hand, for sure, I mean, to have that number, it would constitute problems on the security level.
But you're saying international community hasn't really fulfilled its promises in helping us with the refugees. I know that UN has offered Lebanon to set up refugee camps that Lebanon has rejected. I mean, all these refugees are in free flow right now. It can't be too good, can it? Why do you think you rejected this offer?
This is a real mistake that was committed by the present government. And we have already advised. I mean, we are part of the opposition now for the time being, and we have expressed our opinion so many times. And we proposed to the Lebanese government that they should help in the setting up of a number of, let's say, camps for the refugees, for the Syrian refugees, near the Syrian-Lebanese border. It helps Lebanon in presenting its problem to the world by showing actually what it is undergoing in terms of a burden that such a number of...
So why did they refuse it in the first place?
Actually, there are two reasons. One is that the Lebanese government at that time, during these past 2 years, was very much influenced by, let's say, the Syrian government and the Syrian regime. And in this respect, the Syrian regime has been adopting a policy of denial of what's happening. I mean, they were denying that there is a problem going on in Syria. Just until recently, they started to recognize this. On the other hand, there is certain, let's say, fear among certain components of the Lebanese society that this may constitute later on something similar to the Palestinian refugees in which they were set up camps. So, in fact, I don't think this is true, but this is at least was their opinion that really resulted in not allowing the Lebanese government to set up these camps for these Syrian refugees.
What are the economic implications? I mean, it already cost $2 billion.
Tremendous.
To Lebanon.
There has been a report that was published recently by the World Bank about the economic consequences of such massive number of Syrian refugees, direct and indirect, which is in excess of $7.5 billion. So this is something that Lebanon cannot really take.
The Syrian civil war,
Yes.
for many, is really a part of a larger conflict between Sunni and Shia Muslims, with Saudi Arabia and Iran behind the scenes and pulling the strings. What do you think?
Well, I think this is a misnomer and a misrepresentation of the facts. Let's go back actually to what really happened in March in 2011, over 2.5 years ago. It was a way of, let's say, the people of Daraa at that time who took the street in order to express their disagreement and their feeling of lack of dignity and lack of freedom. Actually, the regime has resorted to its classical tools in trying to separate among the various components of the society. Throughout the past, let's say, number of decades, you can never distinguish and differentiate between the various components of the Syrian society. And you don't know who is the Christian and who is the Muslim, who is the Alawite and who is the Sunnite and so on. That was the situation in Syria. The regime has resorted to these tools in order to really create a sedition within the country.
No, but sir, no one doubts that the conflict started as a local thing. That's a fact.
Yeah.
But I'm talking now. You have Hezbollah and the Iranians who are supplying arms to the Assad regime, and you have Qatar and Saudi who are arming the rebels. I mean, that's a fact. I'm saying right now, the way things are looking at this point, it seems like it's just a part of a larger conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Well, for sure that there is a certain conflict going on between, let's say, a number of regional powers in the region. But you see, now we have to know how it really developed. What was the mistake? And particularly, there was a mistake, I believe, and I have communicated this several times to the Russian leadership, because they are the ones who had, let's say, a role to play. And we always remember for the Russians that they always supported the people throughout the past, let's say, decades in their dealing with the Arab world. They really supported the people. And at the same time, they are the ones who had a possibility to go in between, let's say, the opposition and the uprising on the one hand, and the regime on the other. Instead of taking the initiative and trying to find a solution to a problem that is growing, and that really they were quite aware what the regime can really do in terms of the tools that they resorted to, particularly in trying to assemble and to free some of the terrorists and the extremists that they were present in Syria and elsewhere. And they were used by the Syrian regime at one time to assemble them and to send them to Iraq. And they send them to us in Lebanon. The Russians, they have already seen what the regime can do. They kept on silent and they supported the regime, and the regime went along in a way to carry on this process of creating this sedition. Now, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Something has to be done in order to really bring together. I fully agree that something has to be done in terms of, let's say, arranging for the Geneva II conference to get together into that conference. But on the let's say on a proper work plan, so that ultimately this will lead towards the, let's say, that Assad will not be there in such a formula, because it is not possible for somebody who is a president of a country that has suffered throughout the past 2.5 years of over 120,000 casualties and the destruction of Syria and the creation of a sedition to come back as a continued president in such a country.
After the break, we'll see if there is any truth to claims that Russia supports President Assad, or is it the Syrian people, and who is Hezbollah turning against in Lebanon? Stay with us.
The elusive search for justice. Should individuals, including government officials, be legally held to account for starting aggressive wars, like in Iraq? Is it fair and moral that Bush-era officials be given immunity from prosecution? If they're not held accountable, then who is ultimately responsible?
My name's Daniel Bush.
Tom Hartman in Washington, D.C.
Banking new policies.
Considered, I'm Peter Lavelle.
A pleasure to have you with us here on RT today. I'm Rory Susha.
Did you know the press is the only industry specifically mentioned in the Constitution? Stand by. That's because a free and open press is critical to our democracy.
Track alpha. Roll alpha.
In fact, the single biggest threat facing our nation today is the corporate takeover of our government and our press.
Stand by, camera one.
We've been hijacked by a handful of powerful transnational corporations that will profit by destroying what our founding fathers once built up. I'm Tom Hartman, and on this show, we reveal the big picture of what's actually going on in the world. We go beyond identifying the problem.
We try to fix it.
Rational debate and a real discussion of the critical issues facing America.
Stand by on camera, go.
Ready to join the movement? Then welcome to the big picture.
This might be an expensive car saloon, or a new collection of clothes in a fashion show. Also, designed bags and shoes in the best shop windows. But here, luxury is a school. Is it a lost cause? Hazaribagh Toxic Leather on RT.
Welcome back. Our guest is former Lebanese Prime Minister Fouad Siniora, who thinks Russia is playing into President Assad's hand in the ongoing Syrian conflict. But Mr. Siniora seems to agree that extremism is a problem.
You really think Russia is supporting Assad and wants Assad to stay in power? They're not supporting the regime. From what I know, they just don't want the rebels to come in power because that would have repercussions for Russia's North Caucasus region.
Let me tell you, and this is a certain point that's very important. We understand the concerns of Russia in terms of, let's say, the extremists. But we have exactly the same concerns. What we really expect from Russia is to support the moderates. It's to support moderation in Syria, in their, what is really Syria the day after. What is it going to be?
But where do you make a difference between the moderates and the rebels? Because it's so mixed up right now. Largely, the rebels are really made up of jihadists right now, no?
That's not true at all, at all. You see, what is really is in fact the regime is trying to say is that 80% of the Syrians are terrorists and are extremists. That's not true.
No, they're saying the outsiders are rebels now fighting against the Syrians.
These are a small minority. They are in the hundreds. They are not more than the hundreds. The rest are Syrian. They are ordinary Syrian, that they are pious people. They are not really extremists. They are not terrorists.
Everybody saw on YouTube how one of the terrorists was just ripping out a heart of a Syrian person and eating it.
Well, actually, I told this to His Excellency Sergei Lavrov the other day. I said, when I met with him two months ago, I said, I understand that President Putin has mentioned this thing about the man who took the heart of somebody and ate it. I don't know who is he. He might be planted, or he might be correct that he has a certain revenge, or he is a criminal. But he did not see the man who took the throat of a very famous singer in Syria and took his throat. And he did not see as well that there are more than 120,000 people were killed. So the one they took his heart is something very criminal. And the 120,000 people that died is not something criminal. It is high time to put an end to this tragedy that's going place in this moment. This is a genocide, what's happening in Syria. It has to be stopped, and stopped now. And there is a role, and there is a duty on behalf of the Russians.
What do you think of Russian Kerry Accord? What do you think of that?
Well, I believe that they put an end to a problem in Syria, which was really done by the Syrian regime. They resorted to create some sort of a strategic balance and strategic equivalence with Israel, because Israel has a nuclear bomb. So this agreement that was made is fine, but is that all? Is it over now? I mean, the whole thing is that we finally we are going to get let's say, free from the chemical weapons. What about the continued genocide that's taking place in Syria?
You never told me what you thought of a possible American local strike on Syria. That could still be an option if this agreement doesn't work out.
Let me tell you, I myself, personally, I don't believe in the use of weapons and in the use of violence. The problem is that whenever you really ask the let's say the West to allow the West to use weapons, is that it's not going to really finish a job. It's going to end up in having a half job done, and this by itself is going to make out of Assad let's say a victim. And is going to capitalize on it, and this will elongate the problem, while effectively creating the necessary conditions by making some sort of equivalence between the opposition and the regime that will lead towards going to Geneva and to agree with the Russians that enough is enough, to lead towards some sort of a roadmap leading towards the putting an end to the regime, and in which a real democracy can really be built over there. What is really being said from now and now is that we are afraid to have the fundamentalists to take over in Syria. I'll tell you, if we are going to leave things as they are, the chances of furthering radicalization is going to increase, while on the other hand, supporting the forces of moderation, supporting, let's say, within the region, efforts in order to help Syria to reconstruct itself and to rebuild itself, and while at the same time creating a reconciliation along the model that I have just mentioned to you, is the best solution for Syria. Otherwise, it is a recipe for continued conflict and continued bloodshed and continued, let's say, radiation of forces of violence from Syria into the region. What has happened in Syria is something that does not threaten the situation of Syria to continue as such. It may really spread into so many other countries and creating a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness in the region, and feeling of let's call it defeatist feeling in the region that is going to really aggravate the situation further.
If I may, I just have a couple more questions about within Lebanon situation. Do you see the group of Fatah al-Islam as your natural allies, or do you see it as a threat to Lebanon?
No, let me clarify this matter. Fatah al-Islam is a group of Palestinians who were sent by the Syrian regime in 2007, and they took over a Palestinian camp in Lebanon in the north, and they fought the Lebanese army. And at that time, I was the prime minister, in which I was really firm in really putting an end to this let's say attack that was made, that led ultimately to the destruction of the camp. But it was much better than leaving this let's say terrorist attack to spread all over in the Lebanon. We are let's say Lebanese, and effectively the Muslims in Lebanon and the Sunnites, they want firmly to live together with their counterparts in the country, with all the rest of the Lebanese. We are against the use of religion in order to really try to defend certain principles or certain ideas, and we are against the use of violence in this respect. This is, in fact, in the name of Islam or in the name of religion, these people commit crimes, and this is against let's say the teachings of Islam.
You know, the Free Syrian Army's activities on Lebanese soil implicate abductions and rocket attacks, even though they were directed to Hezbollah, but it was on Lebanese soil. Do you think there should be a crackdown on Free Syrian Army in Lebanon, or they should be tolerated?
Well, I don't think there are Free Syrian Army in here, but any attack that is directed from Syria, whoever does it, whether it is the Free Syrian Army or the regime or anybody, we are against it. And we have expressed this opinion quite clearly in all the communique that was made by the Al-Mustaqbal group of parliamentarians, is that we denounce every attack that is that originates from Syrian, let's say, territories into Lebanon, or any attack that is made in Lebanon by any group that is, let's say, directed towards a Lebanese group.
The Syrian regime has issued a arrest warrant for some of your top officials, your party's officials, including Saad Hariri, saying that you guys are financing the opposition. Do you deny those charges?
Our position vis-a-vis let's say the opposition in Syria, because this thing has nothing to do, what you call it, I mean, these warrants that were issued has nothing to do with the let's say the Syrian uprising. It was issued much longer before that, you see. So it has nothing to do. I mean, these warrants that were made against 30 people as
December 12th, 2012?
No, it was made before, and it was renewed at that time. But what I really want to say is that the Syrian regime has been resorting to such types of efforts in order to destabilize Lebanon, and that's our position vis-a-vis the Syrian uprising. is that we have mentioned clearly, is that politically we sympathize with the Syrian uprising.
But are you financing it?
From a humanitarian point of view, we are helping in the receiving of the refugees. But we do not finance, we do not smuggle weapons or send armed personnel. We do not do any of these things. This is something we disagree with, and we do not really approve of anything of the sort, and we cannot afford it.
I mean, it's pretty obvious that any officials of your party are out of reach for the Syrian law enforcement right now. But aren't you afraid that they may become targets for Hezbollah?
Well, we have been already for quite some time. Our group has been targeted by certain terrorists, and this is something I don't want to really accuse anybody, because this is the subject matter of the International Tribunal to really deal with this matter. For sure, this is a risk that is there. But in this respect, you only live once, you see, and you have to live in dignity. And this is something that we are freedom seekers, and we believe that what's happening in Syria is something unacceptable from all aspects. And what is happening in Lebanon by the continued, let's say, attack against the state as such, and the holding of weapons by a group of Lebanese, and that was initially really used to drive the Israelis out of Lebanon. And thanks for the work that they have done in this regard. I mean, Hezbollah, who was influential in doing so. The problem is that Hezbollah has redirected its weapons against the chests of the innocent Lebanese, and using this as a way to implement certain regional, let's say, plans. This is something unacceptable, and we will continue to stand against such plans, definitely through the democratic process that has been availed to us by our constitution.
That's it for this edition. Hearing from Fouad Siniora, Lebanon's former prime minister, who I met in Beirut. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time here on Sophie & Co.